Blake Masters questioned whether anything could surpass the misery of waking up on an unfamiliar couch in a strange apartment, his head throbbing and his stomach churning. Through his bloodshot eyes, he noticed his wife of 5 years and their neighbor strolling down the hallway of the neighbor's apartment. She was wearing the same outfit as the night before, her head disheveled and makeup smeared. He was clad in nothing but boxer briefs, which made it glaringly obvious he was extraordinarily well endowed. Both were beaming with delight. Yes, Blake thought, there is indeed something worse. Elaine Masters' bright smile faded into a grimace as she spotted her husband staring at her in shock. She had hoped he'd still be asleep when she and Daryl Stevens concluded their third intimate encounter since last night. She planned to confess her actions, but preferred to do so privately, back in their own apartment, not here with Daryl smirking beside her. "Whoa, what the hell, Laney?" Blake shouted. "How could you do this to me?" The outburst proved too much for his weakened state. He doubled over and vomited onto the carpet in front of the couch. Both Laney and Daryl recoiled in disgust. "Man, that's gross," Daryl exclaimed. "Like what you two did wasn't," Blake shot back. For a fleeting moment, Daryl looked genuinely ashamed. "Come on, cheater," Blake rasped. "You can clean this mess up while we clean up your mess." Staggering toward the door, Blake's words struck a nerve in Laney. Her first instinct was to help Daryl clean up the mess, but the sting of being called a cheater by her husband stopped her in her tracks. He had never spoken to her this way in their 5 years of marriage. Deciding it was wiser not to escalate things, she followed Blake out. "Laney." "Ooh!" Daryl started, but she silenced him with a raised hand. Quietly, she waited as Blake fumbled with the key to their apartment across the hall. When he finally managed to unlock the door, he stumbled inside, collapsing onto their couch. "What could you possibly say that I'd want to hear, Laney?" Blake rasped, his voice raw. "You got what you wanted, even though you claimed you didn't. Was it everything you hoped for?" Laney had rehearsed several responses in her mind during the short walk between apartments. Ultimately, she decided honesty was her only viable option. "It was, without a doubt, the most incredible night of intimacy I've ever had," she stated calmly, her tone devoid of fear. "You saw what he's working with. You've seen him in a Speedo. He knows exactly how to use it. Twice last night and once this morning while you were passed out like a drunken fool. I hope you're proud of yourself." Blake flushed at the accusation. He had never blacked out from drinking before. Recalling the previous evening, he remembered only having 4 mixed drinks at the party before waking up on Daryl's couch that morning. "What the hell did that guy give me last night?" he muttered. "Yeah, sure," Laney retorted skeptically, though she privately admitted to herself that she'd never seen her husband in such a state. "So you're saying it's fine to cheat if I get drunk?" Blake asked, his voice tinged with incredulity. "When you embarrass both of us," Laney began, pointedly leaving the sentence unfinished. Blake staggered into the kitchen, grabbed a handful of aspirin, and washed them down with water. Then he stumbled into the bathroom to shower. As the warm water cascaded over him, his mind cleared, and he reflected on the last few months. Deep down, he had known this betrayal was inevitable. Laney had all but admitted it the first time she laid eyes on Daryl. After their careers began to take off, Blake and Laney had moved into a high-end apartment complex 7 months earlier. Several neighbors had gone out of their way to welcome them, including the man across the hall, Daryl Stevens. Outgoing and undeniably attractive, Daryl was clearly devoted to fitness. Blake noticed that Daryl seemed more interested in his wife than in him, a common occurrence, since Laney, a stunning blonde with an incredible figure, often turned heads. Though Blake was attractive in his own right, he knew his wife was a near-perfect 10, and men frequently flirted with her, even in his presence. Until Darryl, however, Laney had always seemed impervious to their advances. Blake observed Laney trying to act indifferent around Darryl, but failing miserably. She frequently stole glances at him, her cheeks flushing. What truly confirmed Blake's suspicions was her uncharacteristic reaction during a casual conversation when Blake remarked that Darryl was a good-looking guy. Laney blushed deeply, took a breath, and hesitantly replied, "I suppose so." Open communication had always been the cornerstone of their relationship. Yet her avoidance of Blake was the greatest. Things only worsened after their first encounter with Darryl at the pool. Darryl's swim trunks left little to the imagination, and Blake noticed Laney's lingering gaze. Refusing to sit back and watch his wife succumb to temptation, Blake made subtle but clear remarks to both Laney and Darryl that he wouldn't tolerate interference in his marriage. "Have I ever given you any reason to think I'd cheat on you?" Blake asked pointedly. Laney retorted sharply after another one of Blake's reminders about staying faithful. "Don't turn into a paranoid fool." Over the following weeks, Blake kept a close watch on his wife. When she mentioned Darryl's upcoming party 2 weeks away, he wasn't thrilled, but couldn't find a good enough excuse to avoid it. Other neighbors and some of Darryl's colleagues would be attending. When the evening arrived, Blake and Laney crossed the hall a few minutes after the party had started. They mingled with neighbors and got acquainted with several of Darryl's work friends. After getting their second margaritas, they separated to mingle, as they typically did at parties. However, this time Blake kept a careful eye on Laney and found it curious that she seemed to be steering clear of Darryl. Blake accepted his third margarita directly from Darryl without hesitation, oblivious to how much the alcohol was affecting him. After drinking it, he felt more intoxicated than he should have, and vaguely remembered having yet another margarita later in the evening. Beyond that, his memory blurred, until he woke up on Darryl's couch the next morning. Throughout the party, Darryl ensured that Laney noticed her husband stumbling around and slurring his words. "You never told me he was such a lightweight," Darryl quipped, chuckling as Laney frowned, watching Blake struggle to maintain his composure. Once the party wound down, Laney and Darryl tidied up some of the worst mess and draped a blanket over the passed-out Blake. "He's careless, he deserves what he gets, but you deserve this," Darryl said, taking Laney's hand and guiding it toward his pants. She cast one last glance at her unconscious husband, then followed Darryl to his bedroom. For nearly 6 months, she had waited for this moment. Once in bed with Darryl, Laney was not disappointed. As their clothes came off, his grin widened. She was every bit as stunning as he had imagined. He noticed she didn't ask him to use protection, and he didn't offer. After their first encounter, they cuddled for about 20 minutes before going at it a second time. Darryl fell asleep quickly afterward. Laney got out of bed and walked down the hall to check on Blake. Seeing her husband still sound asleep, she smirked and returned to Darryl's room, curling up against his back. As she stirred awake, she greeted Darryl with a passionate kiss. "Good morning, Darryl," she whispered. "Morning," Darryl replied. "How about a little celebration before we wake your loser husband?" Laney frowned. Despite her actions, she still loved Blake and didn't appreciate Darryl's insults. "The least you can do is remember I'm still his wife and show a little respect," she said firmly. "Yeah, okay," he muttered. Moments later, they heard Blake moving in the living room. Laney sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, when Blake wandered in. He poured himself a cup and sat in his usual spot, sniffing the air. The lingering scent of betrayal was unmistakable. "You need a shower," he said flatly. "After we talk," Lainey replied. "And don't tell me it didn't mean anything, that it was just sex," Blake growled. "Fair enough," she said calmly, "because it wasn't just sex. It was the best I've ever had." "You've said that already, so I believe you," Blake replied. "But you're telling me you're going to do it again. If you love me, why wouldn't you want me to have that experience again?" Is that what he told you to say, or is that your idea? Either way, I'm not sharing you with him. I've had you for 5 years. Maybe it's his turn now. Lainey's confusion was evident. Wait, what? You're giving me to him? I'm not a thing you can just give away? You're not something I own either, Blake retorted. It's clear I can't stop you from being with him again, so why bother trying? You can go to him and be his be his girlfriend, his lover, whatever. I'm done. Lainey wrinkled her nose as she considered his words. What if I don't want to be his? I'm already yours, she said softly. You've been mine, Blake replied, but I knew this day would come. How could you know when I didn't even know, she asked, incredulous. Maybe I know you better than you know yourself, he said. Up until a few months ago, Blake had believed he had married the perfect woman. Lainey had a swimsuit model's body, sharp intellect, and a magnetic personality. She could come across as a bit of a know-it-all, but Blake found it charming. Independent and self-assured, she didn't need to cling to a boyfriend for validation. Blake first saw Lainey at a college party during their junior year. She entered with 2 friends, instantly commanding attention. Though all 3 women were gorgeous, Blake had a thing for redheads and focused on Lainey. So did many other guys, as it took Blake 2 hours to finally introduce himself. He greeted her with a cheeky line. Normally, I'd offer to get you a drink, but my mom didn't raise a fool. I've waited 2 hours to talk to you. If I leave for a minute, I might not get another chance. Blake said that from the moment Lainey giggled, he was captivated. She seemed just as delighted to be around him. During their last 2 years of college, they shared a home. Blake, a pharmacy student, was on a 5-year course schedule, so they both graduated in the same year. A year later, they married. Neither was inexperienced when they met, but neither could be called a player. They grew and learned together as their life progressed, appearing content with what the other brought into their relationship. Until Lainey wasn't. The first sign came when Lainey finished her shower and realized Blake was nowhere in sight. She crossed the hall to Daryl's apartment and knocked on his door. Daryl, surprised to see her, opened it and remarked, "Wow, did he actually let you come over?" Lainey responded in a clipped tone, "He doesn't care. He said you could have me. He left when I got in the shower." Daryl smirked and replied, "Any man who would give you up is a fool. Come on in." His thoughts, however, were less charitable, driven by selfish desire. Throughout the afternoon, Daryl tried to convince Lainey to move in with him, entertaining thoughts of discarding his current girlfriend without a second thought. Encouraged by his words, Lainey lashed out at Blake, stomping and pacing around Daryl's apartment. "It's my body, and I'll give it to anyone I choose. To hell with him," she yelled at one point. "He's letting me go? Fine. I'll go where I want, and he can stay at home playing with his little toys for all I care." Daryl, amused, smirked at her declaration. He remembered Lainey once mentioning Blake's average size, which he now saw as small compared to himself. He took satisfaction in her anger, believing he was shaping her views. But despite his manipulations, he failed to get her back into bed. Lainey was too consumed with venting her rage at her husband to even consumed with venting it on him. Blake, meanwhile, spent his afternoon at a sports bar with friends, enjoying wings and beer. Before heading home, he ordered a pizza from his favorite restaurant and returned to the apartment around 6:30. When he didn't see Lainey there, he assumed she was with Daryl. Shortly after, Lainey stormed back into their apartment, shouting, "You coward!" Blake, unperturbed, responded, "This is my body, and I've been eating wings and drinking beer with it. Now I'm about to eat pizza with it." Lainey, stunned, stammered, "Pizza? Are you kidding me? Blake shrugged and replied, I got a large. Not enough for Jerk Darrell, though. Blake observed Lainey closely, noting her makeup was still in place and her hair neatly done, implying her plans with Darrell hadn't gone far. Did I interrupt something? I thought Darrell would be knee-deep in you by now, he said sarcastically. Lainey huffed, grabbed 2 plates from the cabinet, and they sat down to eat in tense silence. After 5 minutes, Lainey hesitantly asked, Where do we go from here, Blake? Blake outlined his plan. He would remain in the apartment until their lease ended in 5 months, assuming she would move across the hall to Darrell's. Lainey objected, insisting she didn't want a divorce. The intimacy was great, but you're my husband. You're my man, she said. Blake, however, was firm. I don't share, Lainey. You made that decision for both of us last night. She tried to plead with him, saying, Everyone makes mistakes. Surely you can forgive one. But Blake retorted, Once might be a mistake, but twice last night and again this morning? That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Don't insult my intelligence. You wanted him and he wanted you. You both got what you wanted. The only one left out here is me, but I'll get over it eventually. Lainey broke down in tears, begging to stay, but Blake wouldn't relent. Pack a bag, babe, go back to Loverboy, he said coldly. Later that evening, Lainey knocked on Darrell's door, her face swollen and red from crying. Darrell greeted her with a smile, but he could tell from her expression that there wouldn't be a repeat of the previous night. Lainey declined to share his bed, instead choosing to sleep on the sofa, wearing a t-shirt and an old pair of sweatpants. The next morning, a loud knock at Darrell's door startled Lainey awake. Glancing at the clock, she saw it was 6:24. Who knocks this early on a Sunday? She muttered as she groggily out of the door. A young woman, barely out of high school, stood there. Elaine Masters? She asked. Lainey froze before realizing the girl was addressing her. Nodding, she listened as the girl said cheerily, You've been served, before handing her papers and leaving. Who gets served on a Sunday morning? Lainey grumbled to herself. You do, the girl had replied. Lainey stormed back to her apartment, slamming the door open and marching into the bedroom where Blake was still asleep. How the hell did you file for divorce in one day? She demanded. Blake, calm as ever, replied, Remember when I said I might know you better than you know yourself? I've had those papers ready for about a month. Yesterday I made the call and paid extra to get it done. Today, Blake answered Lainey's question, his stern demeanor softening with his explanation. Had she been that transparent, she wondered? Splitting their belongings evenly wasn't difficult, since they neither owned property nor had children to complicate matters. After their agreement, Blake stayed in the apartment until the lease ended, while Lanyard relocated across the hall. It took her about 2 weeks to fully come to terms with the situation. During that period, Darrell found it impossible to rekindle their physical relationship. When she did return to his bed, Darrell noted that it lacked the spark of their initial encounter. A couple of weeks after Blake initiated the divorce, his mother-in-law called. Blake had always gotten along well with her, so he wasn't sure what to expect. You acted quickly, Blake. What aren't we being told? She asked. What did she tell you happened? He responded. She said she made a mistake one day and you filed the next, his mother-in-law explained. What mistake is she avoiding sharing with me? Blake sighed. She's trying not to admit that she cheated on me 3 times in one night. The next morning, she was overly friendly with the guy across the hall. I warned her that even one mistake would be too much. I don't think she expected me to act so fast, but she broke my heart and my trust. His mother-in-law apologized, saying, I knew you'd tell me the truth. To cope, Blake worked extra hours at the pharmacy, spent more time at the gym, and saw his friends less frequently. Despite their efforts to support him, Blake grew increasingly withdrawn. Though Darrell wasn't concerned about Blake becoming violent, he kept his distance out of caution. If Blake ever lost control, Daryl feared he'd need to defend himself, which wouldn't help his situation with Lanny, who remained emotionally guarded. Since the divorce filing, Blake avoided interacting with Lanny or Daryl, whether in the hallway or parking lot. Lanny was shocked at how quickly Blake let go. "I thought he loved me enough to fight for me. I'm not worthless," she told her mother during a call. Her mother retorted, "No, you're not worthless. But with your attitude, you're not exactly a prize either." Lanny was taken aback. "Whose side are you on, Mum?" she asked. "You may be my daughter, but if I'm taking sides, I'm with Blake. He didn't deserve the way you treated him. I thought we raised you better." Amid everything, Lanny forgot that she and Blake had been trying for a baby before her involvement with Daryl began. She hadn't taken birth control for over 3 months. When she woke up nauseous 3 mornings in a row, Daryl asked, "You're on birth control, right?" Her heart sank. "Oh my God," she whispered. Lanny's lawyer attempted to delay the divorce until after the baby's birth, but Blake's attorney argued the pregnancy occurred after she started seeing Daryl, confirming the baby wasn't Blake's. One night, Daryl lay in the dark, listening to his newborn nurse at Lanny's breast. Although he initially disliked the idea of becoming a father when Lanny announced the pregnancy 18 months earlier, the reality of holding his child overwhelmed him with love. Unfortunately, his affection for the baby far exceeded his feelings for Lanny. While their physical relationship was good, he didn't love her. Outside the bedroom, they were little more than friends. Daryl wished Blake had stayed married to Lanny, allowing her to visit him occasionally, but Blake refused, filing for divorce before the weekend ended. Lanny's feelings mirrored Daryl's. She enjoyed their physical connection, but still loved Blake and would have preferred to remain with him and raise a child together. Ironically, at that same moment, Blake wasn't dwelling on Lanny or Daryl. If he sought revenge, it wasn't consuming him. Busy with his own life, he seemed to embrace the idea that living well was the best form of payback. And that concludes today's story. Did it unfold as you expected, or were you surprised by its twists? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this narrative kept your attention, remember to like the video. New here? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for daily captivating stories. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.